Session. Just another reminder, I'm seeing new faces. My name is Clint Bain. I'm the extension agent for Golden Prairie District, Trego, Gove, and Logan counties. Also in the room today has been Sandra Wick. She's with the Post Rock District, stationed in Smith Center. And it's my privilege to introduce a man who needs no introduction, Curtis Thompson. He's been with K-State for almost 25 years. This is his last year. So any of those burning questions that you've had building up, this is your time to fire it out. And he's our state leader in extension agronomy, and I'll let him take over.
All right, that was probably more information than they needed to know. Yeah, I'm kind of a fixture here at Cover Your Acres, and over the years, we've shared a lot of information, and sometimes you wonder whether you've made any headway or not. Today we'll talk a little bit about some weed management strategies. In the process, we'll cover some research data and give you a little of my philosophy, and hopefully when I'm done it'll be clearer than the background in that picture. But I'm going to spend most of my time focusing on two major weeds that we deal with in western Kansas. Good old kochia. I've been talking about kochia management, I think, every year that I've been here. And who disagrees with me if I say, I think you have the tools to manage kochia? If you don't think you do, raise your hand for me. See, we're doing a good job. I have to phrase it that way because whatever I ask you, you won't raise your hand. So we phrased it in that way. But I do think we can manage kochia. And I do think we have the tools. Now we need some cooperation from Mother Nature. That's sometimes where the kick comes in, okay? We need some moisture to activate herbicides. This is the animal that I am increasingly concerned about, okay? And we used to be able to control palmer amaranth very easily. In the late 90s, when we had the glyphosate-resistant corn and soybeans that came about, a sniff of glyphosate wiped palmer amaranth off the map. In fact, a couple shots of glyphosate worked so well, even I was concerned about, did K-State really continue to need a weed scientist, at least in extension? But trust me, Mother Nature threw some curves and I'm fully employed. But yeah, this is the problem. Okay, if we look at kochia and we look at palmer amaranth, and the lettering in the black, for example, are the resistant populations that we found out there. Okay, there's lots of them that are ALS resistant, both kochia and palmer amaranth. Triazines, the atrazine and metribuzin type products. Yeah, we can find kochia, all right, but not as widespread as I would have thought it would have grown to, considering the fact that we found triazine-resistant kochia back in the 90s, okay? And it really hasn't become a huge problem for us. Palmer amaranth, I think we're finding a few more populations that are resistant. Now, the difference between this resistance in kochia, this is a site-specific, it's the binding site that's changed so that the herbicide can't bind, all right? And that's what we have expected with ALS resistance. This is the one, in my mind, that's a bit scary. In palmer amaranth, it's not an altered binding site. it's metabolism. That Palmer amaranth eats atrazine or metribuzin for lunch, okay? And that is, in fact, a concern. Of course, glyphosate resistance, widespread, and if you don't have it, eventually you will, okay? You're fortunate if you don't have it. Now, we have, over the years, at this conference, asked how many think you have dicamba-resistant kochia, and I'll ask that again. Show me your hands if you think you have dicamba-resistant kochia. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of them. And just a few years ago, it might be 2 hands, all right? Well, I do think that's on the increase, okay? And we use a lot of dicamba to try to manage kochia. Now, a population of dicamba-resistant kochia that we're working with in Manhattan also is ALS resistant, triazine resistant, and glyphosate resistant. That's when we start to run into problems, when it's resistant to so many different modes of action. Okay? Now, if I were a weed scientist at K-State and 25 years old, I'd probably be spreading this seed all over the state, keep me employed. Okay? Not really. So yeah, we're continuing to do work on that particular population. 2,4-D never did work well on kochia, so I don't consider our kochia to be 2,4-D resistant. One of the concerns that I have with Palmer amaranth is this HPPD triazine ALS resistant population that we found a few years ago in Stafford County. There are a few other locations that we have identified. What is concerning to me is we've worked out the fact that HPPD resistant is metabolism. And of course, we said the atrazine resistance is metabolism. And the ALS resistant, we are finding, is both site, but we also have metabolism going on because we have populations that are ALS resistant that don't have a modified herbicide binding site, okay? And it's because it's metabolizing the ALS inhibitor. So that is a concern. Also, there's so much glyphosate resistance around. We know that we've got populations out there that have the 4 modes of action, the resistance to it. That is, that's a real concern. And that wipes out an awful lot of herbicides, okay? And if you're a corn guy, that also should concern you. We've depended on the HPPD inhibitors to pick up the slack, and if we wind up with resistance, it's going to get increasingly difficult to control those weeds. I have in red here the 2,4-D and dicamba resistance. How many of you think here they might have 2,4-D resistant Palmer? Any hands? Okay. About dicamba resistant Palmer. Yeah, you know, and a lot of this is coming from our fallow applications because we, you know, in the past have been spraying glyphosate and 2,4-D or glyphosate dicamba to control these weeds. Well, when we ended up with the glyphosate resistance, we were really depending on 2,4-D and dicamba only, and not being as successful. And of course, the larger the weed, the tougher it is to control, and less likely these herbicides will do a good job if we've got any size to that Palmer amaranth in fallow. We do have some populations that we're working with 2,4-D, and I'm going to say elevated tolerance. That's the terminology a weed scientist uses before they've done enough research to actually call it resistant to 2,4-D. Okay, So pretty good chance it is resistant to 2,4-D. With the enlist programs coming into place, with the extend programs coming into place, the increased use of these growth regulator herbicides, guess what? Yeah, Palmer will adapt for sure. Okay, so controlling these resistant weeds with all these multiple modes of action. The strategy that I'm going to talk about holds true for both. Okay? If we can keep that weed from ever emerging out of the ground, I think we can manage or control it. Okay, and you say, well, man, that's crazy. You know, how do I ever keep it from coming out of the ground? Okay, how do we do that? That's the big question. We've got to have in place a soil active herbicide, all right, that's effective on those species. Okay, has to be incorporated. This is where we get some help from Mother Nature. We've got to have a rainfall to activate those, so that when that seedling is germinating, the first thing it gets to see is these soil residual herbicides and never come out of the ground. Okay? If we do have something that comes out of the ground, don't wait. Spray those weeds when they're small. A small weed, you have a much better chance at controlling than if you sit on your hands and wait for Palmer to get 10 inches tall. All right. That's true with kochia as well. The bigger it gets, the harder it's going to be to control. So in order to do this, we do have to have a good understanding of the emergence pattern of these weed species. Okay? So when does good old kochia come up? We were doing a meeting in Goodland in December, and I had a grower, I put this slide up, and I had a grower say, you know, we just had kochia come up in late November. And I'm going, ooh, hope we get some cold weather. I think we've got cold enough weather that kochia isn't going to survive. Okay? I might be mistaken, but when it was a couple below this morning, I think we got that kochia taken care of. So we're starting out at ground zero. But it is important to know when kochia emerges so that we can be sure to try to get herbicide in place. How many here have any herbicide out for kochia already? Yeah, I'm seeing more hands than I used to. Okay. Let's look at a study done by Anita Dilley and several different weed scientists in this general region of Colorado, Nebraska, and Kansas, where we're simply trying to document the emergence patterns of kochia. Pretty simple study. You lay a quadrant out, okay, mark your area, and every week you send that grad student to that quadrant to count the number of kochia that have emerged. We pull them, and next week you come back and you have to be able to count, all right? So you keep track of the total number of kochia that emerge over time. The column I want you to focus on here is this degree days to 10% emergence and the date that occurred. Now, what do you notice about the heat units required in these non-cropland versus cropland kochia? Takes a few more heat units in cropland. I don't know if some of the practices we've been using in cropland are selecting for kochia that is emerging a little bit later. That might be a possibility, okay, so that your seed, of course, we're going to have a blend because kochia tends to roll around, but you still are going to have more seed of the kochia that actually grew in the field, all right, versus the stuff that is rolling through. The point being, though, is these all fall into the month of March, where we have 10% of that kochia emerge. That suggests that we need to have herbicide on prior to this time if we want to get good control of that early emerging kochia. We're going to have open weather the end of this week. Anybody planning on running sprayers? Yeah, I see a couple of hands. Okay. Maybe not a bad idea. January or February applications can be quite effective. It gives you some time to catch some rainfall prior to this kochia beginning to emerge. The other date is getting to 90% emergence. What we need to have is herbicides in place that last long enough to control that kochia till we get to at least 90%. Well, look at these dates. A lot of these are falling in the month of April. Here's Mitchell, Nebraska. Well, that's early May. The interesting one here is Garden City, May 26th. And there really has probably been some selection pressure going on so that we have later and later emerging kochia in Garden City. And that's reflected in this particular set of data. Controlling kochia during that window, I think, is going to make our opportunity or our chances for effective controlled kochia to be greatly improved. Okay. Let's look at some different herbicides. Here we put these on the 3rd of February. We've got some corn products here. Here's Corvus, Atrazine, and Banville. That's this real light blue line. Okay. Straight atrazine and Banville, we got 3/4 of a pint of atrazine, 16 fluid ounces of Banville. That's this little light red line. The heavy green line is a quart of atrazine, 12 ounces. Again, these treatments are all looking pretty good. Atrazine Clarity Sharpen, Atrazine Clarity Zidua. Zidua also has some activity. Even this dotted line here is Authority MTZ. Might be something that you use ahead of soybean planting. Okay. Most of these we have included Clarity or Banville. Why would we include Clarity or Banville? If we get a 1/4 inch of rain, Banville or Clarity are very soluble. They'll leach into the soil, and by golly, we are controlling kochia. Then we get an inch of rain later on, and the rest of these residual products begin to control kochia. So it is kind of insurance, if you will, to be able to start controlling kochia with lower amounts of activating precipitation. Okay? Sometimes it really does show a big difference. Here is a December 7th application. So the question is, you know, how early can I put this on? And is there some concerns about putting it on in December or maybe even Thanksgiving time? And we did. Here's the 26th of March. Actually, everything was controlling kochia. It looked very good. Even the 9th of April, we're still hanging in that 90% or better. We start to see some separation here between herbicides. The ones that are falling down here are things like atrazine alone, atrazine Clarity, and this blue dashed line is atrazine Clarity and Sharpen. Okay. The ones that are hanging in clean out to the end of May are products like Atrazine Clarity Zidua. We know Zidua has a fairly long residual, has good kochia activity. Okay. Here's Balance Pro and Atrazine. That's the dotted line. The light blue line here is Authority MTZ, and this light red line is Corvus atrazine. So those are all a little longer residual products than just atrazine Banville. Okay. Sometimes we get to the field and we realize we've missed the boat. In other words, Thompson says, control these things before they germinate, get that herbicide out there. You go out to put the herbicide on. Here's March 10th, and this is what I observed. The kochias come up. We're at the cotyledon stage. Okay. My thought was, man, whatever I put on that tiny little cotyledon kochia, I'm going to wipe it out. Okay. Let's look at the data. First of all, I went back in late March. I mean, I was watching this thing about every week or every other week, and I wasn't liking what I was seeing, and I finally had to put some numbers on it, 9th of April. But I wasn't impressed with what I observed. Now we started to get some rainfall, and actually we were getting some nice reach back, all right, from a lot of these treatments. Now everything had Roundup Power Max. By the way, this is Roundup Power Max. Very disappointed in how it turned out, okay. If we started to mix some Banville with it, this yellow line, we had 16 ounces of Banville. The green line was 8 ounces of Banville. I guess I would encourage you to use 16 ounces. Sometimes we don't see any difference. Okay, it just kind of depends on rainfall patterns and all those kinds of things. But we tended to see an advantage of a pint over 8 ounces. Now, the treatments that continued to give us some good control and even a slight increase was when we also had tank mixed Fierce or Fierce and Sencor. Now Fierce has Zidu in it and Fierce has Valor in it, okay? And if you throw some Sencor in there, it also ended up, but just under 80% control. That still suggested that we in part had missed the boat. We still had probably a little more kochia here than we'd hoped, okay? Especially with some of the kochia densities that we actually see. If we, these are some just additional products, but I'm throwing this one out there to make a point. If you look at, for example, the yellow lines, there's this one and there's this one. They're both Roundup Power Max and Zidua. This one is with Banville. This is one without Banville. If you look at the red lines, it's Authority MTZ and Roundup Power Max. This is with Banville. This is without Banville. This is Banville alone. All right, so I mean, it's doing a lot of work. We get a little better control in here with some residual products, but without Banville, we really did miss the boat. And this is why it kind of depends on the rainfall patterns. If you put this product on and 3 days later we get 1.25 inches of rain, well, you'll probably not see a lot of difference of the with and without Banville. But you get 1/4 inch of rain, and you'll see a huge difference when we have Banville with it versus no Banville with it. Okay? So it's insurance. So we came back on the 20th of May, and this is how it progressed. In 10 days, we went from cotyledon kochia to what's this stage? Yeah, we call it the dreaded fuzzball stage, right? See all that pubescence? You know, we've always said it can be really difficult to get herbicides in on that little kochia plant. So let's look at the data. First of all, instead of on this April 9th rating being down here in this 20 and 30, all of a sudden we are up to that 55 to 70%. So right out of the chute, I think we got a little better control on that fuzzball stage than we did at the cotyledon stage, okay? And we also saw some reach back, but there is a real difference here in some of these treatments, okay? If we've got just Roundup and Banville, 8 ounces, that's that particular line, okay? The dashed red line here represents AIM 2,4-D and Authority MTZ, okay? If we look at this green line, well, that's a little higher rate of Banville. That's that 16-ounce rate of Banville. Here is AIM, Banville, and Authority MTZ. This one is Roundup Power Max, Banville, and Authority MTZ. All of a sudden, we are up in that almost 90% control. It was acceptable, okay, in those cases. By the way, here's straight glyphosate. So we did get a little better control at this stage, but still very poor, not acceptable. This is some work with some Sencor treatments. Here is the yellow line represents Sencor 8 ounces and methylated seed oil. This is still our Roundup line. The green one is Sencor and Sharpen. This particular blue line is Sencor and Balance Pro. And again, the Sencor is synergizing the HPPD inhibitor, the Balance Pro. And that's reflected here. But again, we're still not above 80% of these treatments. Over the years, I've been telling this group, we've talked about Valor and we've talked about Spartan. Which one is the better product for controlling kochia? We've said Spartan, right? Valor, well, we've struggled a little bit. Here is a picture of Valor, okay? 3 ounces. There's no triazine here, no growth regulator. It had to depend on itself. It was put on pre-emergence. We did get rain for activation, okay? You can see a boatload of kochia in there. Here is Spartan, and you can find an occasional kochia in here, but we do see a lot better control with Spartan than Valor. And so we can use both of these in a soybean program. And I always say out west, you ought to be considering the Spartan-based programs. So we've got a study here that evaluates Valor and Spartan tank mixes with, well, here is Valor and Spartan with no tank mix. So here's Valor. The light color is the low rate. That's 2 ounces. Here's 3 ounces of Valor. We switched to Spartan. We've got 4 ounces of Spartan. Here's 6 ounces of Spartan. So that's the difference between Valor and Spartan. What happens when we mix it with 8 ounces of metribuzin? First of all, this is what 8 ounces of metribuzin is doing for us. Add that to Valor or add that to Spartan. All of a sudden, we're up here at 100%. Add a pint of dicamba. Well, this is what a pint of dicamba does for you. If we add that to the Valor, it bumped up very nicely. Adding that to Spartan, regardless of the rate, pretty darn good control. Here's the combination of the two, metribuzin and dicamba. That alone, without any Valor or Spartan, and the addition to Valor or the addition to Spartan. And so if we do have some tank mixes, for example, metribuzin is contributing a lot, or can contribute a lot, synergize these things. Maybe I've been too hard on Valor. We are getting better control with some tank mixes, say Valor and metribuzin. Okay. Questions on this? All right. So if we look at just herbicide programs for managing kochia, and this isn't going to be all inclusive, all right, but it tends to pick up or bring in the groups of herbicides, and I have the modes of action here listed in the numbers, but for sure atrazine in the mix pre-emergence is pretty important. It synergizes a lot of things. Everything works a little better with a little atrazine. All right. Mesotrione is now become very cheap. We used to pay over $5 for a fluid ounce of Callisto. Now we can purchase a fluid ounce of generic mesotrione for less than $1. Okay, and so that changes the finances. Good old Lumax and Lexar have been very effective. Sharpen, Verdict contains Sharpen. That class of herbicide also has been very effective on kochia. One of the things that I get concerned about Sharpen and Verdict is the rates that we can use, and the residual may not be as long as we hoped. Okay. Corn, we've got a few extra products, and again, this isn't all inclusive, but all of these have some pretty darn good activity on kochia. Here's soybeans. I'm saying authority-based products, Authority MTZ, Spartan, okay? Again, I'm still leaning on that sulfentrazone component, okay? Zidua also, or Anthem, it has that pyroxasulfone in it. That does have activity on kochia. If we are using Valor, I guess I would encourage you to slip in a little metribuzin. Now, when we get into some of our high pH soils in western Kansas, you may say, well, I really don't want to use metribuzin. And you know your ground better than I do. But we know metribuzin can be hot on soybeans in high pH soils. If we're dealing with sunflower, the sulfentrazone or Spartan is still the best product that we've got. Oh yeah, here's a slide on mesotrione. Okay, and I had a guy tell me that they purchased a gallon of generic mesotrione for $70 a gallon. Okay, well that's less than $1 an ounce. Okay, so yeah, it used to be $5. Now the concern that I have is this is going to look too good to you guys. All right, let's put a boatload of mesotrione on every acre we got, and let's just keep doing it because it'll take any good old chlorocetamide atrazine herbicide and it'll make it a real herbicide. Okay, how many here in the late 90s sprayed 2 quarts of glyphosate on either corn or soybeans and cleaned up all the weeds? It worked well, and we did it again and again and again, and then all of a sudden we didn't control our weeds. Okay, the same thing is going to happen if we decide to depend entirely on these HPPD inhibitors. And by the way, we do have HPPD resistant soybeans coming down the pipeline here in the very near future. So we start using an HPPD inhibitor in sorghum, soybeans, corn. May as well spray Husky on your wheat. That's an HPPD inhibitor. Guess what? Yeah, we're going to be widespread HPPD resistant palm amaranth. We don't have any HPPD resistant kochia, but give it time and it'll likely happen. Let's talk a little bit about controlling kochia or managing kochia in wheat. There's a lot of stuff going on in this slide, but if you look just at the black portion of the treatment, this is an in the wheat crop treatment, okay? And these numbers are ratings of kochia control either May 9th or just before harvest, okay? And actually, we're getting pretty decent control of kochia with all of these products. Of course, there's dicamba in all of them. Here's Rave, Zidua. What are we doing with Zidua? We're putting Zidua in the mix to try to give you some soil activity, extended residual control. Now, on the label, Zidua label, it says you can't apply Zidua on wheat after it has 4 tillers. Most of the time we have 4 tillers in the fall, but this year we've got enough late planted wheat, we maybe don't have 4 tillers yet. So there still could be a window to use Zidua to try to get some extended kochia control, okay? In this particular year, 2017, we didn't see a huge benefit to the Zidua applications. In some years, actually, we have. But everything tended to work pretty well. Here's a late application at the flag leaf stage of wide match. It initially didn't look so good. Pre-harvest, it still hung around 90%. Not too bad, okay? And so then we come back after wheat harvest and spray the herbicides that are in red, okay? And we have ratings 2 weeks after application and a little over 4 weeks after application. And when we used Clarity 2,4-D in crop, Clarity 2,4-D, you know, we're still in the mid-80s. There's kochia left. All right, not as clean as we would like. And also, you know, here's Clarity Zidua, and again coming back with Clarity 2,4-D, we're still hanging around in that 90% control. Here's Prowl. All right, we may have got some residual control from that Prowl. I'm not sure, but we actually are up in the mid-90s. But it really was when we started to spray post-emergence, atrazine, sharpen, methylated seed oil, and UAN that we started to clean some of these plots up pretty nicely. Okay, and you know, that contact herbicide, if we've got a few plants out there, we can do a pretty good job. If you got solid kochia, of course, we don't do nearly as good. And so it always is important to do an in the wheat crop treatment. Now, I'm not going to ask how many here plan to spray weeds in your wheat. I'm concerned that a number of you aren't planning on putting another nickel in this wheat crop unless something really turns around, okay? But I would contend if you do, I'm going to ask you, do you plan to harvest that wheat? If you plan to harvest wheat, then you better spray the weeds, okay? Because this is what happens if we don't. Now we have absolutely, in these treatments, we have absolutely nothing in the wheat crop. And so when we come back in here, we had a lot of kochia to contend with, all right? Now, if we look at good old Clarity 2,4-D, you know, it's not very impressive, all right? Here's Clarity Atrazine. It's not very impressive. It isn't until we get using gramoxone or gramoxone atrazine that we can even get to 90%. There isn't any hundreds, okay? and we don't get complete control. Now, if we came back with a second application, we might be able to clean things up. But there was too many kochia there to be able to expect to get 100% control. Questions on this? So control kochia in your wheat crop, it'll make controlling it in fallow hopefully manageable. Anybody here grow sunflower? Okay. We do now have a Zidua registration for sunflower. Of course, Zidua is a product from BASF. Active ingredient is pyroxasulfone. It initially was just an 85% WDG, okay? And the rate that we use is a function of our soil texture, and that's the rate structure that you can use, and we have this table listed in the proceedings that you have in hand, okay? It says that we can put this Zidua on sunflower from V1 to V8. Well, nobody told BASF that we never have V1 sunflower. We start out V2, all right? There's a pair of true leaves that come out, and when they're 1.5 inches long, we just go from cotyledon to the V2 stage, all right? So V2 up to V8. Now, do we have any foliar activity from Zidua? For all practical purposes, no. Again, we're looking for soil activity out of Zidua, giving us extended residual control of things like kochia and palmer amaranth. There also is a new formulation of Zidua. It's called Zidua SC. It's a liquid, 4 pounds per gallon. And I have a little formula here. You could look at any one of these rates. Say you're going to use 3 ounces of the dry product. You can run that through that little formula and calculate your fluid ounces that you need. We did this work all the way back in 2008, and there were several locations across the country that were doing this work, and I think some of this work actually did lead to the registration of Zidua in sunflower. But we have different rates of Zidua, okay? Now, the different colored bars is tank mixes with good old Spartan. So if you have the blue bar is no Spartan, that is the Zidua alone. So obviously if we don't have any Zidua, that's an untreated check. And as we increased our rate of Zidua, palmer amaranth control increased. We're at that high rate, we're up above 95% control. Now, as soon as we started to tank mix some Spartan with it, it really didn't matter if we were 3 or 4 fluid ounces of Spartan. We got excellent control of the palmer amaranth. This is also palmer amaranth. This is our Manhattan location. The story very similar. Now we can get a little more rain in Manhattan, and I think we had a little more rain to do a better job activating the Zidua. And in fact, even this low rate of Zidua gave us very good control of palmer amaranth. And of course, adding any Spartan to it at all gave us excellent control of palmer amaranth. Good tank mix, okay? This is sunflower yield, and we have several locations. This is an average, or the data is combined over several locations. And if we look at our untreated check, that's basically this particular yield. And as we increase, looking at the blue bars, as we increased our Zidua rate, we did see increased yield, no difference between these two. If we started to add some Spartan in the mix, in general, it usually helped. And actually our top yielding here was the high rate of Zidua, and it really didn't matter in that case which rate of Spartan we used, okay? So actually I think Zidua has a good place for helping us manage both kochia and Palmer amaranth in sunflower. Questions? Okay. All right, so let's talk a little bit about Palmer amaranth and when does it come up? All right. I would say let's talk about the same technology. We'll use pre-herbicides to control Palmer amaranth when it's germinating. Does it come up in March? No. All right. Does it come up in April? Well, maybe if we got warm enough, we might just start to see some Palmer amaranth in late April. Some years we don't. In my plot work, I always plant corn over that last week of April. Very often you have to hunt, but you may be able to find a plant or two, okay, that are coming up. But yeah, come May though, it starts coming. And when it rains in June, it's coming. And when it rains in July, it's coming in August and September. That's part of the problem with Palmer amaranth. It keeps coming. That's why we talk about these extended residual products, okay, to help manage it. Now, we don't have a nice study to show you Palmer amaranth emergence like we showed you with kochia. That trial is going to be underway starting this spring, however, okay, to help us understand where we absolutely need to have active herbicides in the soil to manage Palmer because it's germinating and coming in these huge flushes. This lists a whole host of herbicides, and we actually have more herbicides that are effective on Palmer amaranth than the list I showed you on kochia, okay? Now we still have our atrazine, and we still got mesotrione and Lexar and Lumax, Sharpen and Verdict. This chlorocetamide, atrazine, or even the straight chlorocetamide, here's dual 2 magnum, or any of that group 15 are very effective at managing Palmer amaranth, okay? So in combination with even an atrazine, it'll do a great job. Here's our acetochlors, or I just say degree type or outlook type of herbicides. They all have excellent activity on Palmer amaranth. We just have to be sure that we put one of those in place. Same way with some of our HPPD inhibitors, and here's some herbicides, 4 different modes of action. All of these actually having activity on pigweed. I mean, that's a good deal. Resicor, a new one by Dow, 3 different modes of action, all having activity on pigweed. A new one, Harness Max. So we do have a lot of choices to try to manage the Palmer amaranth. Soybeans, all of our prefix, authority-based, valor-based products, even pendimethalin, those kinds of things, all have pretty darn good activity on Palmer amaranth. So we have a lot of choices. We just have to be sure to always use a pre-emergence herbicide when managing Palmer amaranth. Here in sunflower, we've got the Prowls, the Sonolans, the Esmetolachlors, Spartan, Zidua, all of those can do a good job on Palmer amaranth. So I don't understand why Palmer amaranth is such a problem. So overlapping residual, that's giving you extended control, okay? Putting something in that post program and it might be a clover seed. Okay, Halix GT is a good example of one we use in corn that gives you extended residuum. That's in part trying to keep Palmer out of our program later and later in the season. And then we get a good competitive crop, and dark works pretty well. Okay, we may produce a little seed, but it isn't going to affect grain yield. All right, so I think I just got 3 data slides. I'm going to let you look at those in the proceedings. I will be around this evening. If anybody has questions, I will be around all day tomorrow. So with that, we'll wrap up. I do think we have the tools to do a good job in really all of our crops. Okay, it is a greater challenge in things like sunflowers and sorghum, but we've got them. This is the job I'm taking on come 18th of July. All right, we're checking out, got 10 grandchildren and aging parents, and so we're going to change our focus from weeds to family. Thanks.